Good morning and welcome to The Skinny for Friday, December 19th. I'm Mitch Perry, the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and the best of the holiday season to you and yours, as it were, here on our last Skinny of the year. Flying a solo again this morning, but so happy to have you join us. My colleague Ray Roa, who we believe was running in the Honolulu Marathon last week, although I actually looked at the website. I couldn't see Ray's name or see how we performed, but we'll learn about that when we're back in a couple weeks here. So again, solo today, but back on January 2nd. So big federal developments going on right in the last couple days. Yesterday, the Trump administration moved cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. And also, of course, more files regarding the Jeffrey Epstein case are set to be released sometime before midnight tonight. If we get a chance, we'll try to talk about those topics later in the program. Also later in the program, we're going to be talking about what is quickly becoming one of the most unpopular developments in America, and that's AI data centers. We're going to be speaking with somebody from the group Food and Water Watch, why people are so down on them and what it means that President Trump recently signed an executive order banning states from creating robust regulations around artificial intelligence data centers. But first, do you know much about the Florida Attorney General, James Othmeyer? He's never been on the ballot before, but he will be next year as he goes before the voters for the first time. He's been in the headlines a lot over the last year, of course, after Governor Ron DeSantis selected him to succeed Ashley Moody as our Attorney General. There's possibly maybe only one man who can stop Othmeyer from being Attorney General for another 4 or possibly 8 years when we vote next November, and that's former Miami-based State Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez, who was the top candidate to become the Democratic Party's nominee for Attorney General next summer. And joining us live via Zoom from South Florida is Jose Javier Rodriguez. Senator Rodriguez, good morning.
Good morning, Mitch. Good to be on with you. Hello to your listeners, especially in the Tampa Bay area.
Yeah,
good
absolutely.
To be on with you.
Yeah, great to have you here with us. And just to tell our listeners, if they're not familiar with you, you of course were a legislator in the Florida House originally from 2012 to 2016, and the state Senate from 2016 to 2020. You lost re-election in 2020 in a most controversial fashion, and we'll get into that. And of course, most recently served in Joe Biden's administration as U.S. Assistant Secretary of Labor. You were a graduate of Brown University and Harvard Law School, beginning your career with the Peace Corps in Senegal before returning to South Florida as a legal aid attorney. So a couple of things we want to get into, but I guess first thing, I like to ask this of any candidate running for any office, and that is, why do you want to be our next Attorney General in Florida?
Listen, it's straightforward. I'm running to be the people's lawyer. That's what the job is. You're supposed to look after the interests of the people. As Attorney General, I'm going to focus on crime, costs, and corruption, improving our lives here in Florida. The current Attorney General is the least independent, most corrupt Attorney General we've ever had. Rather than focusing on public safety, he's out there chasing headlines in D.C. Rather than tackling costs and corruption, he's at the root of the corruption, and he's the reason why the costs go up. So, again, it's supposed to be an independent office, supposed to be looking out for the people. That's been my whole career trajectory. You mentioned I'm a lawyer. My entire legal career, I've been privileged to be able to live out my values and fight for the little guy. Workers who've been defrauded, low-income homeowners. It's the same thing I brought to Tallahassee. It's the same thing I'll bring to, when I was a legislator, same thing I'll bring as Attorney General, looking out for us, fighting for everyday people, again, for public safety and battling those costs and corruption that are hitting us so hard here in Florida.
Yeah, let's get into those. But first thing, and we'll get into it maybe a little later or deeper about what's going on, especially in South Florida. But obviously, it's been over 2 decades since Florida has elected a Democrat for Attorney General. That was Bob Butterworth back in the late 90s, actually. How do you overcome that, basically, right? I mean, roughly we know there's a 1.4 million voter registration advantage for Republicans over Democrats. So for any Democrat running for statewide office, it's a challenge, right? Because the landscape is so tilted just to start the game, as it were, for Republicans. So how do you get through that?
Well, you heard the issues that I'm talking about, how the Attorney General's office is going to improve people's lives, crime, cost, corruption. None of that is partisan. and we've seen plenty of states elect Democratic Florida attorney generals, excuse me, Democratic attorneys general, just use the term correctly here.
Right.
In many other states, even if they, go red in federal elections, and there's a good reason for that, is because, if you look at my trajectory, my entire career has been, again, as I said, standing up for the little guy, doing that hard work, fighting the special interests in Tallahassee. And so as an attorney, I never asked, low-income homeowners or workers what their party affiliation was. As Attorney General, I'm not going to ask, children and seniors and crime victims that we're fighting for. I'm not going to ask their party affiliation. These are not partisan issues. My trajectory shows that. And you mentioned General Butterworth. I think he was the model for how you serve. He was not partisan. He served you had Republicans in the cabinet, and they worked together on many issues. He was independent, so he was an independent advocate for the people of Florida. Sometimes working with the legislature and the other members of the cabinet, sometimes not, and that is the job. And I will say as well, if we look back at those days, decades ago, the Attorney General's office was very actively involved in doing many of the things that I'm going to bring back to the AG's office. It was leading the way on a lot of consumer efforts, defending us from, being scammed as customers, as taxpayers. That has not happened in decades here in Florida. And back then, Florida was leading the way. Now we're not even at the back of the pack. We're absent on a lot of things, and I'm sure we'll get into electric utility regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get into that right now, actually, because you mentioned some of these attorneys general, and you mentioned Bob Butterworth. Also, let's just mention Charlie Crist, of course, who was attorney general from 2002 to 2006, and even Bill McCollum, 2006 to 2010. What they did, what James Ethmeyer did not do, what you're talking about in terms of holding corporations accountable, is they intervened in a public utilities rate hike request. And of course, many of our listeners will know the fact that Florida Power and Light, the state's biggest public utility, of course, just last month, recently got from the Public Service Commission, their settlement basically approved a record-breaking rate hike here in Florida. And one of the, I guess people are saying it's actually the biggest rate hike in the history of the United States. And as you know, other attorneys general in Florida have done this, have intervened. James Ethmeyer was silent on this. Would you have intervened if you were in power at this time?
100%. I would have done more than that. If you look at attorneys general across the country, Michigan's a great example, as many other states. Not just to intervene, but to investigate and bring independent legal actions against them. But let's go back to the intervention piece. You're absolutely right. We got to go all the way back to General Crist. I guess he was this before he was governor. It did intervene in rate proceedings, and I know you mentioned your listeners are going to be aware, but it's worth reiterating. Florida Power and Light came for the biggest rate increase of any utility in the history of the country, and they were asking for the biggest guaranteed profit. They came up with a settlement with the largest corporations in the country that use electricity here. The Public Service Commission approved it, with minimal scrutiny. At $7 billion. Half of us in Florida here are forced customers of Florida Power and Light. All businesses and all households are forced customers, and there's $7 billion being taken out of our pockets and given to Florida Power and Light with no justification. And our Attorney General was completely absent. And even worse, if you look at his advocacy and the advocacy of his predecessor, that they seem to largely kind of parrot what Florida Power and Light and the other giant utilities wanted them to do. I mean, they're going after solar. I mean, it's bizarre stuff. It only makes sense because of that corruption that I will tackle when I'm an AG and And I hope you're going to ask me about the 2020
Yeah,
election, my
exactly.
history battling for power.
Absolutely. We want to get into that. Yes, because it's frankly, it's a little personal between you and FPNL. Back in 2020, you were, of course, running for re-election that year in the state Senate in your district in Miami-Dade County. And you lost by just a handful of votes in a race that was manipulated by the presence of a ghost candidate, a third candidate, who also had the last name of Rodriguez. His name was Alex Rodriguez. No, not A-Rod. He was another person nobody ever heard of. I don't think we've heard of him since. And this was a very complex in many ways. But FPNL was at the center of this. They did not want you to be reelected. This all came out in discovery and courts and what have you. I guess tell our listeners, Jose Javier Rodriguez, what the heck happened to you back in 2020?
Well, so first of all, it's not personal.
Yeah.
For me, serving in office, for me, advocating for people, when if you're dangerous or you're scamming people, I don't care how powerful or you are, I'm going to come for you. That's the energy people will get from me as Attorney General. But when I was in the legislature, nobody stood up for the forced customers of Florida Power and Light and the other electric utilities more than I did. And as a result of that, you mentioned that the scheme that they ran, and the CEO of FPL personally greenlit this operation against me. An email came out, and he said, JJR, Jose Javier Rodriguez, of course, me, is at it again, make his life hell, right? That's what they said to greenlight this operation. And why did they do that? They did it because they didn't want an effective advocate fighting against them when normally they get whatever they want in Tallahassee. That's what they just got right now. Same is true with property insurance and many of the other cost drivers impacting Floridians. And that's, again, you asked me at the top, why am I running? Because we need an advocate. We haven't had one in a very long time. And I think this FPL the issue is central because it really shows you how that corruption in Tallahassee impacts your pocketbook and why it's so important to have an independent attorney general that's really going to do the job.
If you're just tuning in right now, it's 18 minutes past the hour. You're listening to Skinny here on WMNF 88.5 FM. I'm Mitch Perry speaking with Jose Javier Rodriguez. He is a Democrat running for attorney general next year. If he's successful in the August primary 2026, he'll likely be going up against the current Republican Attorney General, James Othmeier. How would you label the work of James Othmeier in the almost a year he's been in office? He's been very active, much in the headlines. One of the things he's done, hasn't got a lot of publicity on this, is that he's joined a lawsuit with other Republican attorneys general seeking to reverse the FDA's approval and deregulation of the abortion pill mifepristone, arguing that mail order basically undermines state abortion laws and poses health risks. This, of course, has been around for over 2 decades. In fact, that's the majority of abortions in America are done by the pill, if you will, by mifepristone and misoprostone. He wants to basically, get rid of it.
Well, you said how you would characterize him, and then I'll talk about some of the areas of focus that he's focused on. I said earlier that he's the least independent attorney general we've had. He is a wholly owned subsidiary of the power structure in Tallahassee that's responsible for keeping things the way they are here in Florida. I also say that he's the most corrupt attorney general we've ever had. It may be that I should start saying he's the most criminal we've ever had. He's under a scheme he ran to funnel $10 million out of the Medicaid program.
Right, the Hope Florida situation.
Criminal investigation.
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. Just reminding your listeners, that's the whole Hope Florida Foundation scandal that is still being investigated in Tallahassee right now.
Yeah. So I'm just answering the first part of your question.
Sure.
I'll get to the second part. But with prior attorney generals that maybe have a different political party from mine, I would say their priorities are wrong. They've misused the office. But in this case, he's doing the opposite of what the job requires. I will root out corruption. He's the root of corruption. So it could not be more stark. I'm an Eagle Scout and he's a criminal. That's basically the matchup you have. when it comes to how the office is being used, I said at the top, we need to focus on public safety. Way too much of what the Attorney General is doing is for consumption in Washington. He has gone after mifepristone on using consumer laws, right? And there's plenty of consumer issues they could be focused on. I would be focused on bringing our costs down by going after insurance companies, especially property insurance. I would be going after the utilities. I'd be going after corporate landlords. I'd be enforcing in the minimum wage. Frankly, all the tools that the Attorney General has to make people's lives better. And he's doing stuff, frankly, is for consumption in D.C. And there's a lot of actions he's taken related to abortion access that I would not be taking. I would not be doing what he's doing. He's also intervened, in the judicial waiver process, and in ways that are very extreme, really out of touch with where Floridians are on this issue. And so I absolutely would not be doing that. And one of the things that the attorney generals do is look out for the interests of their state, when it comes to federal policy. And so, he hasn't been doing that either. Again, it's just a lot of, he loves getting involved in these social issues things. He's had an obsession with going after rainbow crosswalks, and he's sued Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, and another thing,
really.
Yeah, so, excuse me, Senator. Again, we're talking to former state senator Jose Javier Rodriguez, running for the Democratic nomination for Attorney General. Another thing James F. Meyer has been doing is, let's talk about immigration, because certainly Governor DeSantis, probably more than any governor in the country, has really embraced Donald Trump's promise to enact mass deportations. State passed laws earlier this year to ensure that every county in the state has to sign these so-called 287G agreements with ICE. And of course, the governor set up these detention camps in the Everglades in North Florida. But regarding the 287G agreements, the state law basically does say that every one of our 67 counties has to be a part of that. And they are. That's just a state law. The law does not say that about cities. And yet we have seen this year, when it comes to places like Key West, when it came to places, or actually Orange County, when it came about their detention facility there, actually, that Attorney General James F. Meyer has basically threatened these cities, saying that because they were talking about maybe not doing the 287G, that they were enacting sanctuary city policies, which are illegal in Florida, and basically threatened to remove them from office. What do you make of that?
Well, there are two issues related there. So first of all, on immigration enforcement, we've got a border. We also have other laws that come into play in terms of how people should be treated. There's a very uncontrolled effort in our state here when it comes to immigration. Part of the context that, that's helpful for your listeners, they may already be aware of this, is that the current federal administration is running up their numbers in a handful of states where state leaders will just never stand up for the interests of their state. And unfortunately, the leadership in this state has fallen down in that regard. And so when it comes to communities, when it comes to individual rights, including of U.S. citizens, they're basically letting ICE do whatever they want. And that's not the job of state government. State government is to keep us safe, including a safe and secure border. But the way they've been doing is very uncontrolled. And then there's another aspect of this, which is they in Tallahassee, they really do not like local government. Right. They don't like home rule. It's gotten very extreme. They really look for any excuse. Rather than do their job, they like to go around and beat up on local governments, independently elected local governments, often without a real legal basis. As you mentioned, at 287Gs, we've got more 287Gs. I think half the 287G agreements in the entire country are in Florida.
That's correct, yes.
There are no sanctuary jurisdictions. Our local governments here cooperate with ICE, right? They do their obligations. And when you see a lot of the headlines that the Attorney General's trying to grab, that the governor's trying to grab, what they're really doing is as you say, they're using the asymmetry of state government, right? I mean, state government has a lot of power, has a lot of money and lawyers and local governments. It's extremely expensive and difficult for them to defend these things. And so, even if they don't have a legal basis to say, okay, you're complying with 287G, what more can you do? And local governments are like, well, we don't have the budget to, for example, put immigrants drive immigrants 3 counties away to where you're telling us. And then, the state government will say, well, that's, then you're not complying. So it's almost more like trying to conscript local governments rather than make sure local governments are maximally complying with what they've got to do to help enforce. It's just way overboard. It's really an abuse of power. And it's one that goes way beyond the immigration issue because it has to, as Attorney General, I'm going to respect our state constitution. And if you're a locally elected official, and you're fulfilling your duties, if I disagree with how you're doing them, as long as you're fulfilling them according to the law and you're not violating the law, that's a disagreement that we'll have, but we're going to move on and do our jobs. That's not the attitude we have right now. It's very destructive, and it will end if I'm Attorney General.
Again, if you're just tuning in right now, you're listening to The Skinny here on WMNF 88.5 FM. I'm Mitch Perry. I'm speaking with Jose Javier Rodriguez, former state senator here down in South Florida. And he's also a Democratic nominee running for Attorney General. Of course, that election is not until next August. Senator, I want to go kind of stay with immigration, but talk about your neck of the woods in South Florida, Miami-Dade, and the politics there and what that might mean for 2026. Last week, of course, we saw in the city of Miami, which is not Miami-Dade. It's one big part of Miami-Dade, but it's not the whole county. A Democrat, the first Democrat in almost 3 decades, or at least a registered Democrat. We know Manny Diaz, of course, was the mayor back in the aughts, and he later became the Democratic Party chair. But nevertheless, Eileen Higgins, of course, won last week for mayor, and she won big time. I believe 18, 19 points. Obviously, she got some NPA and some Republican voters there. I'm curious your thoughts about this in terms of how it plays with immigration, as we've just been talking about the last few minutes, because, of course, when you think about immigration, that was a huge issue in the national election last year. Definitely seemed to help out Donald Trump and hurt Joe Biden, who the perception was he certainly didn't care about folks coming illegally across the border. And so, the president seemed to have a lot of support there. President Trump's numbers have suffered of late, if you look at the latest public opinion polls, on this maximalist approach of mass deportations, where basically anybody who was undocumented now all of a sudden is very vulnerable, and we're seeing this happen in real time in this past year. So in terms of the vote there, we know that Miami-Dade went red officially this year, the county, and going back years, we've heard the perception that it's the Democrats they believe are socialists, right, and that folks who come from Venezuela and Cuba, Nicaragua, come from those governments, have a real aversion to that, and that's hurt the Democratic Party in Florida in recent years. But do you believe that on immigration and how there's been a pushback on this? And we've heard comments from Congresswoman Maria Salazar and the woman who beat you in 2020, State Senator Elena Garcia, who were pro-Trump people, being very critical of the president now on his stance on immigration. Can that be something that can be a catalyst for Democrats in South Florida next year with a Hispanic vote, maybe turning back to the Democrats in some way?
What I see, so I'm a city of Miami voter. I was happy to vote in the election. I'm happy that we now have a new mayor. Mayor-elect Higgins is now Mayor Higgins, and really what it shows is voters, not just in the election for mayor, but in a commission race and in some charter amendments. Voters' message was, we want to end the corruption at City Hall. That was a message that they sent. We want to, they also said, we want to tone down the crazy political rhetoric and have our leaders focus on what's most important. And most importantly, they voted for a competent leader who has a track record of showing that she can tackle tough problems that are driving up a lot of costs. She's going to tackle, on housing, transportation especially, and on a number of issues, and really focusing on what the city can do to make the city better, to improve citizens' lives, and kind of end a lot of the political games. And frankly, it's not, from folks that were supporting her, I did not see it as particularly partisan. I know
Hmm.
outside the city, the national headlines have made it partisan,
Right.
but and frankly, for me, it's a similar thing to my race, right? As running for Florida Attorney General, it's the same kind of thing, an independent advocate for the people, focused on the issues, and I think that's how we're going to win because when you mention on immigration. Uh, you know, again, Higgins is one of those local officials, and as I mentioned, that wants to focus on what's best for the city, right? And they're going to comply with the law. Everybody is in Florida. I mean, there's no instance where they're not. It's just, the bullying tactics out of Tallahassee are just a little bit much. And you say it's a maximalist approach from the federal government. In Florida, in particular, I would call it an uncontrolled approach, right? Where they're not just where it's having a really negative impact on our communities. I mean, the way that they're doing them. I mean, ICE raids at daycares and, you're doing all the above without any consideration for due process and for the impact on communities and other priorities that there may be. Very robust immigration enforcement. Protecting the border is one thing, but what they're doing is uncontrolled. And, yeah, Florida, again, we need leaders who will stand up for Florida's interests. And when there's an abuse of power, when there's extreme tactics, stand up for us. They don't do any of that. All they do is try to get attention, from DC or on, cable news or whatever it is. And that's got to end. And I think that's in part the message voters sent here in Miami.
Yeah, and just going back to that, but again, I've seen these comments from Salazar, for example. I haven't heard too much maybe from Jimenez or Diaz-Balart, but I know they're hearing from their voters, from their constituents who don't like this at all. And Salazar at least had not scared to be critical about it and say this is not right. Maybe they're looking at their own electoral possibilities, and I think maybe in her case she is. Maybe the others are just insulated. They don't feel they're going to get hurt at the ballot box next year. But what do you think in terms of Hispanic voters who have been, again, as I said earlier, really kind of moving more, have been Republican in recent years, especially in your neck of the woods, maybe again looking more favorably at the Democrats next year because of this issue?
Yeah. One thing you see from some of those folks is they ramp up the name calling when they don't have solutions to problems. And I'll tell you, my father left communist Cuba as a teenager. I take great offense to that name calling. I'm a proud Cuban American Democrat. There's a long history of us, and it's interesting. I'll just tell you, having battled these issues about corruption in Tallahassee on behalf of taxpayers, it's interesting because the way we let's keep with the FPL topic. The way we regulate utilities here in Florida is like the Soviet model, right? And I'm advocating and fighting for the free market, which is what we should have a lot closer, particularly in solar and a bunch of other areas where we really need to unleash the power of the market. And we have leaders in Tallahassee name calling and doing literally the opposite of what a free market democracy should be doing. So again, I take the strongest offense to some of that name calling. But when you see that name calling coming out, it's almost always because they don't have real solutions to the problems. And they did that with Higgins, and obviously, it rang hollow because we're fighting to make people's lives better and to preserve what's great about this country. And so anyway.
Yeah.
It's the season that we're in. Where
do you think it could help? But Senator, do you think this can help out Democrats basically in terms of the backlash about the strong immigration moves by the Trump administration in Florida, in terms of voters maybe who've been voting Republican in recent years switching over to the Democrats next year?
Oh, yeah. I mean, to your point, when we have elected leaders who, campaign for the president and have seen voter attitudes react to what's happening in many of our communities, that's absolutely a sign that it's one of the things that voters are growing tired of. And what I see, as I'm going around the state, I'm talking again about crime, costs, and corruption, how we're going to improve people's lives, refocus on public safety, tackle high costs, tackle the corruption in Tallahassee. That's what the focus ought to be. And I think that's a lot of the message as well.
We're going to move on in just a moment, but last question for you is, and I know you're not running on this. This is more of maybe a federal issue or international issue, but you are down there in Miami. It looks increasingly like the United States, led by Donald Trump, is trying to remove Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro from office. Do you have any concerns about that?
Well, Maduro is a dictator. I know that Congress, in a bipartisan way, has been doing their oversight of the federal government and what they're doing. But again, it comes down to the fact that Maduro is a dictator. And
would you like to see him removed from office?
Oh, that's not my.
You're right.
Well, what I like to see is a different question from what's a responsible thing to say at this moment. I'll let of course in my own family, in my own personal view, here in Miami, we absolutely have a clear answer to that. Mm-hmm. But I'm not trying to grab headlines.
Yeah. No, I get it, and I don't want to. I get that. I'm just curious because it is such a hot topic down in Miami, absolutely right now. And so
Venezuelans made their decision in July of 2024. So
right. An election that looked like was very corrupt in terms of the results there. We're going to leave it there right now. Again, we have been talking the last half hour with former Miami area State Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez. He is a candidate to run for the Democratic nomination for Attorney General. That election, of course, is not until next August. And just, I guess, one more last question for you. Again, in this state that has really become such a Republican stronghold in recent years, you're going to need, obviously, part of being a candidate, statewide candidate in an expensive state like Florida is raising money. Do you think you can raise the money to be competitive against Uthmeier next year?
I think I'm going to be doing everything. I think we're going to be doing everything we need to do to get around the state and talk to all voters. I mean, I've been to Tampa Bay multiple times. Yeah, I'll be back many, many times.
Look forward to having you in the studio here.
Absolutely, no, I'd love to do that. But we're for us, it's about building the kind of operation that can get us in all parts of the state, talking to all voters, and whatever it takes to do that, I'm confident we'll be able to do.
All right, that has
been.
Will
I be outraised? Yeah. Absolutely, because I'm running against the corrupt power brokers in Tallahassee. So,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, exactly. I mean, we're seeing that. We saw Byron Donalds announce yesterday he's raised $40 million already in his race for governor. All right. Well, we have been speaking with Jose Javier Rodriguez, a former Democratic state legislator from Miami. He, as I said, is running to become the Democratic nominee for Attorney General next year. Senator Rodriguez, great to have you here on The Skinny. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Absolutely. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. We're going to now move on here. And again, we do hope to have Senator Rodriguez in studio sometime in 2026. Also, love to have James Uthmeier in here as well. A lot to ask him about. A little thing called Hope Florida. We're going to see, again, what's the results, if any, that come out of the investigation going on with the prosecutor's office in Tallahassee, because that is, to the best of our knowledge, still going on. And James Uthmeier seems like he was kind of involved there. If you think there was something shady going on with that whole $10 million that came from the Medicaid settlement to those two groups that were fighting against the cannabis measure last year. Okay, moving on now. Corporations like Google and others are pouring billions of dollars into data centers, which are being built to support artificial intelligence models that supposedly will transform how we live and work. But there's been growing opposition by neighborhoods around the country, with residents concerned about the effect that the construction of these data centers will have for the environment, for energy prices, and the surrounding communities. The typical AI data center uses as much as electricity as 100,000 households, and the largest development will consume 20 times more, according to the International Energy Agency, or IEA. They also use up a lot of water. So joining us right now via Zoom to discuss these issues is Jim Walsh. He's the policy director at Food and Water Watch. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Mitch. Thank you so much for having me. I think you put it out there very well. Floridians are dealing with rising utility bills and real concerns about drinking water supplies. And these massive data centers threaten to make both worse. They demand the electricity of a small city and millions of gallons of water just to cool their servers. And we're seeing residents in places like Palm Beach pushing back because they see these risks clear. And that's why we support a statewide moratorium on these data centers, as well as a national moratorium until we have safeguards in place that protect families' wallets and their water supplies. This isn't an anti-tech position. I want to stress that it's really one that makes sure that people and our natural resources are protected as these developments come forward.
You mentioned, yes, Palm Beach. So let's talk about that. So this is actually last week. Palm Beach County Commissioners, they met for a zoning hearing on this project called Project Tango. It was a proposed 200-acre hyperscale AI data center complex plan near Waxahachie and Wellington in the western part of the county. There were hours of very emotional public comment from more than 50 residents that said they were worried about nonstop low-frequency hums, heavy water consumption, and long-term environmental impacts. And ultimately, the commissioners voted unanimously, 7-0, to postpone the data center application until next April. And that's going to give more time for impact studies. And let's see here, despite high demand for the community. So a lot of people wanted that to kill it outright. They're not doing that, but they are taking a break there. So, Jim, again, I want Food and Water Watch on here. And again, we were going to have, of course, Brooke Ward, who's from the Tampa Bay area, who's the senior Florida organizer. Brooke was unfortunately not able to make it today, not feeling great. So we're so happy that you're here with us on this, because you guys last week, Food and Water Watch, you sent a letter to Congress undersigned by more than 200 organizations, including 6 here in Florida, calling on them to support a national moratorium on the approval and construction of these new data centers. What was in that letter, if you could tell us about that?
Sure. This letter really simply recognizes that the data center build out is having serious impacts on utility bills and water supplies and jobs across the country, and that the industry's ambition to build out these hyperscale data centers across the country is conflicting with real needs of communities. And we need to actually put the brakes on these projects, much like they did with the Palm Beach County Commissioners, saying we need to take a closer look at this and make sure that we understand the impacts this is going to have and put protections in place to protect our communities. And that's what is really prudent and necessary to happen right now, because the water scarcity concerns that are happening in Florida are actually happening across the country. The utility bills that Floridians are experiencing are something that's happening across the country, and it's being driven in a large part because of the data center and the big tech industry's desire to push forward their profit ambitions above the needs of communities and people.
If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Jim Walsh from Food and Water Watch, talking about the interest and opposition growing to these AI data centers that are blooming all around the country. We're just starting to get some discussion about these happening in Florida. That's why we're talking about the one in Palm Beach County. And so I don't know if you saw this, Jim, but so Governor Ron DeSantis, he's been talking on a low level about this for actually months, but he came out just last week with this proposal to protect consumers by establishing an artificial intelligence bill of rights for citizens. And he says basically it's also a proposal to protect Floridians from footing the bill for hyperscale AI data centers and to empower local governments to reject their developments in their communities. He actually mentioned yesterday he was at a press conference and he complimented the folks in Palm Beach County. Let me just tell our listeners what this AI Bill of Rights, which has not been formulated yet into a bill, but I know he's looking for somebody in the House and Senate to sponsor this when the session begins next month. Part of the AI intelligence or AI Bill of Rights will include reenact protections for Floridians already have passed against, quote, deep fakes and explicit material, including those depicting minors, prohibit any state or local government agency from utilizing DeepSeek or any other Chinese-created AI tools, prohibit AI from using an individual's name, image, and likeness without their consent, require a notice to consumers when interacting with AI, prohibit entities from providing licensed therapy or mental health counseling through artificial intelligence, provide parental controls for minors, which will allow parents to access the conversion their child has with a large language model, and set parameters for when the child can access the platform, ensure data inputted to AI is secure and private. And there's more others. And then he has separately a data centers proposal. And part of this is protect ratepayers. It says it prohibit utilities from charging for Florida residents more to support hyperscale data center development, including electric, gas, and water utilities. No taxpayer subsidies for big tech. Allows local government to prohibit data center construction development. Ensure that water resources are not utilized to the detriment of the public, and protect natural Florida. That would prevent the construction, siting, or operation of a data center by foreign principals or on land classified as agricultural and or lands under a greenbelt exemption, and require setbacks and vegetative buffers. What do you make of this? And are we seeing anything similar from other states along these lines?
Governor DeSantis' pushback, I think, really highlights an important component of the AI and data center pushback, and that's the bipartisan nature of this issue. You know, he is highlighting protecting local control and ratepayers, but also some of this is coming a little too late. You know, we've already seen Floridians have one of the largest rate increase in U.S. history. And, you know, at the heart of this matter, and why Governor DeSantis is coming out with this, is because that people are facing an affordability crisis, whether it's groceries, healthcare, insurance, cost of utilities. Everything is more expensive, and it's weighing on families hard. And, you know, he's responding to the growing opposition to these data centers, where people recognize that these data centers are actually what's causing these sorts of, or, you know, largely contributing to what's causing these issues for their families and affordability. And the pushback we're seeing in Florida is happening around the country, where we're seeing communities come together and stand up to these data centers and say, we don't need more of this. We're seeing bills introduced in state legislatures to try to rein in the industry and protect the public from these projects. But at the core of this, what we really need is for communities to put forward their own moratoriums, to push state legislators to put forward moratoriums. Because even if you're a community who you yourself have said, we don't want to put these things in yet because we don't know if the harms that are going to have and the impacts, and whether or not we have the proper safeguards in place, if a community down the road puts one of these things in and doesn't take that cautionary step, that can impact your rates, that can impact your water supplies, because we all share these combined resources. And that's why it's critical that communities take their own steps to put these projects on hold, but also continue to push state and federal officials to ensure that we actually put the brakes on these projects while we can put these proper safeguards in place.
Right. And, you know, I want to give you a counterpoint and give our listeners a counterpoint here. So I'm reading a column by conservative columnist Rich Lowry today, and he's criticizing Senator Bernie Sanders, who I didn't see Bernie Sanders actually quote about this, but he takes basically the point of view that Food and Water Watch does, I believe, Jim Walsh. And I just want to read a couple lines from this column. He says, Sanders is against data centers on principle. If he can stop the creation of new data centers, he can squeeze AI research to a standstill and supposedly save American jobs while giving Congress more time to regulate the new industry. He goes on to write, this might be the most poisonously stupid idea of the year. The sheer destructiveness of it is on par, say, with blocking new generators after Thomas Edison set up the Pearl Street Station in 1882 on grounds that we didn't fully understand the effect of electrification on cities, or prohibiting the mining of coal in Britain the outset of the Industrial Revolution. He says there's a winner-take-all aspect to these sorts of tech races. The company that takes the lead earns the revenues that can flow back into further research and development. In doing so, it maintains its lead in the market. Why wouldn't we want this company to be American rather than Chinese? Now, we know there's this big battle with China basically on AI. We're seeing this thing with the the superconductor, the chips, right? The ones that NVIDIA now is able to sell to them. So what do you say to folks, Jim Walsh, when people say, like, okay, I understand some of these concerns on the local level, but this big opposition to it is gonna hurt our industries here, and it's going to put us at a disadvantage in this battle of AI, which is inevitable, that is coming our way, whether we like it or not?
Look, Food and Water Watch, as well as Senator Sanders for that matter, have a long history of being independent voices that are standing up for the needs of people and individuals against big companies that exploit everything they can for as much money as they can. The tech industry is it's the biggest business on the planet right now, and they are causing damage across the world. And when I think about the need to have technology move forward and how to balance that, those are things that we need to figure out, because it's not going to matter if we win the AI race, quote unquote, if we don't have drinking water, if people can't afford basic needs because energy prices are so high and unaffordable. When I think about the challenges that we have to face going forward, looking at the example that Speaker gave with Thomas Edison, we're seeing now the impacts of broad fossil fuel energy development and the impacts it had on our planet. And taking some time to understand that may have actually helped us to build out a better energy system that isn't actually contributing to the warming and changing of our planet's temperature and climate. It may have led to an energy system that wouldn't inundate communities with high levels of pollution from burning fossil fuels. And so we're in a situation now where we have a massive industry coming forward that is causing real challenges and problems to the public. We're not saying we shouldn't have any data centers. We're not saying that we shouldn't have AI, but what we are saying is that we need to make sure we have safeguards in place to protect the public from these developments before they go forward.
Again, if you're just tuning in right now, you're listening to The Skinny here on WMNF. It's 52 minutes past the hour. I'm Mitch Perry, the host of The Skinny here with Jim Walsh from Food and Water Watch. We're talking about the concerns about these new AI data centers, which are spreading across the country, and again, the opposition to them. So, Jim Walsh, of course, last week we had, right after, in fact, after we had Governor DeSantis unveil his AI Bill of Rights, Donald Trump came in and signed an executive order on AI. Basically, the document aims to create a federal standard for AI regulation that isn't undermined by a, quote, patchwork of varying state laws. It directs Attorney General Pam Bondi to create an AI litigation task force within 30 days whose sole responsibility shall be to challenge state AI laws that run afoul of the order. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick is directed to identify which laws require AI models to alter their truthful outputs. And White House AI czar David Sachs and Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, Michael Kratsios, to recommend language for a federal statute preempting state laws regulating AI. There's a lot of pushback on this from Republicans I have seen. And I know Governor DeSantis has said that he doesn't believe, he says it's going to have to be Congress that's going to stop the state from doing this. What he hopes that Florida to do, that executive order would not be enough. Your thoughts about what Trump said last week in this executive order?
This executive order is a thinly veiled attempt to intimidate state and local governments and clear the way for unfettered AI developments. And with it, the data center expansion. These things go hand in hand. And while the executive order didn't specifically address data centers, there are concerns that people who are fighting data centers should have around this. And one, and first and foremost, is that this executive order comes on the heels of a failed attempt by the tech industry to attach provisions to the National Defense Authorization Act that would have limited communities' ability to make rules and regulations, and states' ability to make rules and regulations to protect their residents from AI and data centers. Similar provisions to this were actually rejected 99-1 in the Senate earlier this year. And because of this opposition, we're seeing at the grassroots level, it's making it very difficult to move these policies through Congress. So the administration has taken it upon themselves to try to tamp down local opposition to the data centers to clear the way for these projects going forward. I'm very concerned that the executive order itself creates a task force which is specifically focused on bringing litigation against units of government below the federal government that pass laws to restrict AI development. And that very well could bleed its way into the development of data centers. And with these frivolous lawsuits that the administration can be bringing forward, and I say frivolous because if they had the things to hang their hook on, they would have brought these lawsuits already. They would have already been challenging these things. But now they're searching for these needles in a haystack excuses to go and rake local communities over the coals for the efforts they're taking to protect residents. And it's irresponsible, and it's not something that we need the leaders of this country doing, is undermining efforts to protect the public from AI and data centers.
Jim Walsh, before we let you go, what do you recommend to our listeners who are hearing this conversation and are concerned about this? What do you think they should be doing?
Sure. The most important thing that people can do is continue fighting these data centers. For those of you who are doing it, you can get involved with us if you don't know where a fight near you is. We have if you go to foodandwaterwatch.org, there's a get involved link where you can actually sign up to volunteer. Somebody will get in touch with you and tell you about how you can support our national efforts or get involved in local fights if they're happening near you. In reality, Floridians and people across the country are facing affordability issues with their energy and drinking water. And if we don't stand up to these project developers and fight them at the local level, the state level, and the federal level, they will win. But coming together, we can fight and we can win. All right.
Jim Walsh, the Policy Director at Food and Water Watch. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon. Take care.
All right. Thank you very much. So there you are, folks. We just got a few minutes left to go. If you have any interest in what we were just talking about, want to give us a quick call, 813-239-9663. We only have about 3.5 minutes left here on the program, but wanted to leave a couple minutes left to talk about some other things here. But again, I'd love to hear what you think about this. This is, again, we haven't had this happen in the Tampa Bay area in terms of proposals that I know of. I know there was something about Plant City. We'll have to see about that. I'm not sure where the development of that. But this thing in Palm Beach came to a local government just last week. And again, the folks they didn't want it, basically, okay? And so the county commission said, okay, we get the message. We're not going to cancel this thing outright. Look, there's probably some money involved. There are some jobs involved with this. But again, there's a lot of, I think, as we realize more as we end this year. By the way, Time Magazine last week naming AI Person of the Year. I actually care about this because I still care about Time Magazine, right? So I was a little annoyed by this. I do think that, we all know it's coming, whatever the intensity of the AI experience in our world. But I think this is so healthy to hear these local communities, because again, just on the dollars and cents level, right? When it comes to basically what it's going to cost us in terms of energy, right? We just saw what happened with FP&L. Now, I will say, I mentioned this last week in the program, you might remember, because the person from representing Florida Power and Light said when it comes to data centers that they're saying that these companies have to pay up front. They're not going to charge the ratepayers for these recovery costs like they've known historically to do for nuclear power plants and the like. You got to pay for it, whether it actually ever gets built. They're not going to do it on these. Maybe they realize they know that it's so sensitive here. Okay, hey, let's see. We've got Lee from Auburndale calling in. Good morning, Lee.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Thank you. Yes, here in Auburndale, Polk County in general, we're being overwhelmed by these developers coming in, building these huge apartment complexes. We don't have enough potable water here in Polk County. And so a lot of these little old towns here in Polk County, Auburndale, Haines City, Winter Haven, Lakeland, they're all scrambling because of the potable water issue, and therefore they're having to drill deep down into the salt water because that's the only thing left when they're drilling these wells, which means they're going to have reverse osmosis plants to make the salt water drinkable. And then you've got to have more nuclear power plants to run these reverse osmosis plants so people can drink this water. So bottom line, the price of water is going to be huge. and most people are going to be really struggling. So I really love your presentation today. Thank you for giving it.
Thank you very much, Lee, for calling in. And really, we got to get out of here. I wanted to talk more about this. I wanted to mention the Epstein files coming out tonight. Are you excited about that? Do you care about that? By the way, there was an extensive article in the New York Times that came out yesterday about the friendship between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. If you care about that, you should try to read that. All right, that's going to be it for us. Hey, Merry Christmas, everybody. I'm going out home to San Francisco tomorrow morning. Very excited about that. But we'll be back on Friday, January 2nd. Ray and I will both be back here, so we look forward to hearing from you the new year. I want to thank Skip Sassy, who's been great today, as always. Skip, thank you so much. Also, Anthony Maduro on the phones. Of course, Joellen Schilke is coming up next with Art in Your Ear, as she is every Friday, following us here on The Skinny after NPR News. Thank you so much. You are listening to WMNF Tampa, 88.5 FM. I'm Mitch Perry. See you in a couple weeks.